Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Ting Xu will defend the academic thesis Pain-Related Cognitive Biases, Understanding Their Interrelationship and Combined Impact on Pain Outcomes. I want to welcome you all on this early Monday morning. I will introduce all the opponents as we address their questions, as they pose their questions. My name is Frank Peters. I'm Emeritus Professor of Clinical Psychology. But before we start the public defense, I would like to invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis. So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Dear prorector, members of committee, dear my supervisors, friends, colleagues, and my family, welcome to my PhD defense. In the next few minutes, I will show you what I have done in the last 4 years. We are all familiar with pain. Imagine here is an old grandma who suffered from the arthritis for more than 6 years. She was always thinking negatively, even without the social support from her family. Because of this old grandma, her arthritis situation became worse. From this small example, we can learn the pain does not only related to our body discomfort, it's also related to our thoughts and the support we received. So for today's presentation, I will mainly focus on the psychological factors, especially for the pain-related cognitive bias, affect the way we experience the pain. Pain-related cognitive bias include attention bias, interpretation bias, and memory bias. For attentional bias, the old grandma only focused on the arthritis-related information, even overlook the treatment can manage the pain. And for the interpretation bias, even a small twinge appeared on the old grandma's knee, and she thought, that must be a signal that my arthritis become more worse. And for the memory bias, she recalled the pain feeling even more painful than they really are. So because of this cognitive bias, and the old grandma's arthritis situation become more worse and even influenced her ability to work. And nowadays, some studies already demonstrate that individual attention bias, interpretation bias, and memory bias contribute to the pain outcomes, but the results are not always consistent. So, some researchers suggest that pain-related cognitive bias should related to each other and exert their combined effects to pain outcomes. So there are 2 research questions raised for my PhD study. The first one is, are pain-related attention bias, interpretation bias, and memory bias associated to each other? Or the second one, is the combined impact of attention and interpretation bias on pain outcome stronger than their individual impact? To address about 2 research questions, I did 1 literature research and 3 experimental study. For the literature review, initially, I searched around 300 papers, and after carefully checking, we narrowed it down 14 papers that met our criteria. And we carefully checked the results part, and we found attention bias and interpretation bias had a positive relationship with each other, but some studies already found they have negative relationship with each other, and while some found no relationship between them too. And also, for the interpretation bias and memory bias, there is no study found relationship between them too. Also, for the attention and memory bias, some study found positive relationship, but others found no relationship with each other. In one sentence to summarize the results, the findings are mixed. And then we try to figure out what influenced the mixed results. The first one is the participants' characteristics, and the second one is the procedure used are different. For example, in one study, they used the pain-related phase to investigate attention bias, but they also use pain-related words to investigate the interpretation bias. And also, the variations in outcome measures. It means that the tasks are used to measure all cognitive bias are different. So, because of the literature, the finding we found from the literature review, and we would like to improve our experimental study design. And for the experimental study 1, we used the facial identification task to measure interpretation bias. Especially, there is an ambiguous face appeared on the computer, and the ambiguous face morphed from happy and pain face. The participant need to interpret the ambiguous face as happy or painful, so which help us to calculate the interpretation bias index. And also for the attentional bias task, there are also some face pairs appeared on the computer, and the participants can freely review the pairs of the face, and their eye movement will be recorded. And so we can measure how long and how often the participants look at the pain-related face compared to the neutral face, which help us to calculate attentional bias index. And also for the memory bias task, the participants will put their one hand into the cold water, and they will report their pain feeling regarding the cold water immediately. And 2 weeks later, I will call them again, and I will contact them again, and they need to recall their pain feeling related to the cold water. So the difference between the 2 times are measured to the memory bias index. For the pain outcomes, the first step is similar and the memory bias. And the second one, the participants will wear a handphone and they will listen some sound from the computer. Every time when they listen to the computer, they need to press a keyboard to give their response. And I will measure the error rate and also their reaction time and the task performance. And for the step 3, they need to conduct the 2 times simultaneously. And I will record the difference between the step 3 and the step 2. So it's meaning that how pain interfere the task performance. And for this task, for this study, we found the attentional bias and the interpretation bias had a positive relationship with each other. But for the individual bias, they didn't contribute to the pain outcomes. Also, there is no combined attention and interpretation bias to outcomes. So for this study, the disadvantage of this study is we used totally same stimuli to test attention and interpretation bias. But the disadvantage is that we didn't use the consistent paradigm to assess all cognitive biases. So in the experimental study 2, I would to improve this design compared to the previous one. And in this study, there are 3 kinds of cues. And the longest one called CS plus cues. And these kind of cues are sometimes related to the pain stimuli. But for the middle one and the round one, they called CS ambiguous cues and CS minus cues. These kind of 2 cues didn't related to the pain stimuli. And for the attentional bias trials, participants need to identify the location of the dots. So when the dots and the cue appeared at the same position, same location, we assumed that their reaction time must be quick, especially for the CS plus cues. And if the cue and the dots appeared on the different location, we assumed that their reaction time must be low, especially for the pain-related cues. So the difference in reaction time between same location versus different location was calculated to attentional bias index. And for the interpretation bias, participants need to report their pain expectancy for each ellipse. And also for memory bias, and the participants need to report their pain expectancy and also the pain-related fear to each ellipse. And 2 weeks later, I also contact them again, and they need to recall their pain feelings related to the ellipse. So also the difference between the 2 times was used to calculate the memory bias index. And the pain outcome procedure is totally as the previous one. And for this study, we found attentional bias and memory bias have the positive relationship with each other and have a negative relationship with interpretation bias. And there is no combined effects of attention and interpretation bias to pain outcomes. For this study, the advantages is we use the personal relevant stimuli, that is pain shock, for our experiments. And we also used the same stimuli to test all cognitive biases. And the last advantage is that we use the unified paradigm to assess all kinds of cognitive bias. But for this study, we didn't consider how the surrounding environment might influence cognitive biases. So in the experimental study 3, we added the context factor, especially pain-related threats, in the pain-aim paradigm to explore how threats influence the cognitive bias and their effects on the pain outcomes. Importantly, for the previous study, the threat manipulation task is not directly related to the following cognitive bias task. But for our study, the participants will present it with a fake story about their skin resistance, which directly related to the following cognitive bias. And also the pain outcomes, the procedure is totally same as the previous 2 studies. And for this study, we found attention bias and memory bias had a positive relationship with each other, and also the combined attentional bias and the interpretation bias have a combined effect to pain outcomes. And now we go to the conclusion part. Even though my experimental study didn't reveal the consistent relationship between 3 kinds of cognitive bias and also their combined impact on pain outcomes, I think maybe it's due to the variation in the stimuli and the paradigm I used. And I think this paradigm could be enhanced by incorporating more ecologically valid tasks. And the final slide is about the implication. And I think my study enhanced understanding the complex relationship between cognitive bias in pain perceptions. And also it paved the way for more effective interventions such as pain-related modifications. And now finished, and thanks for your attention, and now I will give the floor to the prorector.
Thank you very much for this beautiful, very clear, eloquent presentation. The opposition will be opened now by Professor Vlaeyen, who is Professor of Bodily Distress at Maastricht University and who also served as chair of the assessment committee of your thesis. The floor is yours, Professor Vlaeyen.
Dear Ting, dear candidate, I've read your PhD thesis with a lot of interest. And I wish you to compliment you with the good work. You did a lot of work, a systematic review, 3 experimental studies in a complex matter, these biases. Also introducing some novelty, which is also very nice. And I think that at least some of your work is already published, which is also a very nice accomplishment. So there's a lot of good things to say to you. And I would like to extend my compliments also to your promoters as well. But I'm here also to ask you some questions, probably. And I actually have 2 questions for you.
Okay.
A conceptual one and a more technical one. Let's start with the conceptual one.
Okay.
Right? So you have 3 main hypotheses.
Yeah.
One hypothesis I will not go into detail, but one is that the biases can be influenced by the threat context. So that was one. But then there are 2 other ones which I think might be a little paradoxical. So one hypothesis is that the biases have some kind of complementary impact, interactive or summative, which suggests actually that there are different mechanisms. Yeah? And I can imagine that, for example, the memory biases appeals to the memory system, you have the attentional bias for the orienting system, and then the interpretation bias is more like a meaning-making system. So, but if that's the case, then why would you expect a high correlation among this? Why would they be interrelated? Because if you expect to be interrelated, then you would suggest that they have a common or a shared mechanism. But then you would not find the interactive effect or the combined effect. So I'm a little struggling with trying to understand your hypothesis regarding the interactive or the combined effect versus the relatedness of these biases. Can you help me?
Yes. Highly esteemed opponent, thanks for your kind words and questions. So maybe you asked the interactive effects and the combined effects is different effects, right? If I understand correctly.
Well, if you think there are combined effects, then I don't understand very well why you expect that they are interrelated. Because if you say that expect interrelationship, you expect relatively high correlations, right? Is that what you expected?
Yes, because I think according to the theory, and if you have a high interpretation, and if you interpret the ambiguous stimuli as ambiguous stimuli as pain-related, and your attention bias will improve. That's why I have a hypothesis that the bias should be related to each other. And some study already found the individual bias could contribute to the pair outcomes, but the effects is not lasting. That's why I assumed that the combined effects will be lasting and have a long effects.
But you agree that the biases have a kind of a different mechanism? Is that, or do you think that then all these biases actually have a shared mechanism?
I think maybe they, sorry, what do you mean the magnify?
Do they have different underlying mechanism, the 3 biases, or do they all have an underlying shared mechanism? That
in my study, I think they will share the combined contribute to the pair outcomes.
So you think that there are different mechanisms?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. Shall we go to the next question, which is the more technical one?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's about, especially chapter 5, I have a question about that. And I was also interested in your thoughts about this. We're talking about biases, but I wonder whether there is no another bias in play here, which is maybe a bias that you are having. Maybe, I don't know, I'm very interested, a confirmation bias. That maybe you interpret the things that you wish to see, but I can be totally wrong. So I'm just wondering. And it's, I'm looking at interaction effects of your tests. For the combined cognitive bias hypothesis, because you find some interactions there, but looking at the p-values, they are just 0.05, and that's exactly the limit. So I was just wondering, how confident are you that there is indeed this combined effect based on your p-values of the interaction terms in your tests? And also for the threat, you did 28 tests to test the interaction of fear and the other bias indexes. But there you said you did a Bonferroni correction, but I could not really see how you calculated it. So it's also two questions, sorry. So the first is, are you confident about the combined effect? And the second is, how did you calculate this Bonferroni correction?
Yes, for the combined effects, I used the hierarchical regression model. So for the first step, I put the age and the gender in the first step, and the second step, I put the individual bias, and for the last step, I put the interaction of the biases. So one step, and I used the regression model to calculate the combined bias, combined effects to the PAN outcomes.
I understand, but the results look very weak. Low effect sizes, I think. The p-value 0.05, that's not very strong, is it?
Yes. So maybe in the future, I think need more studies to evaluate the effects, because I think my study just the first step for this direction.
Okay.
So, of course, most studies need to be done and to.
And I think you said somewhere we have to be cautious, and I think you're right there.
Yeah.
And then the last thing about the Bonferroni correction, because for the interaction with the threat or the fear variable, I would have expected a correction which is then alpha divided by the number of tests, which is 0.05 divided by 28, because you did 28 tests there. But you said that when you find a p-value of 0.10 or 0.02, that's already significant. So that I'm a little puzzled how you calculated that correction.
So which Bonferroni can you?
Bonferroni correction.
Yeah. So which one? Because in my study I used.
For the study 5.
Yes.
Table. What is it? Table 5 in the supplementary.
Yeah. Maybe I can check it.
Of chapter 5. It's on page 135 and 136. So you have. Two interactions significant, but they are not lower than 0.01. So I was wondering what kind of correction that you used there. And there is even a 0.02 there.
Yes. Okay. Maybe for this question, later I will check my data and to think about. For this one.
Because my point is, if you would have been a little stronger and using this correction, you probably would not have found any significant interaction, and that would be against your hypothesis of the influence of threat as a context. So it would have an influence on your interpretation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vlaijen. I would welcome our next opponent, Professor Jackson, Professor of Psychology, University of Macau in Macau. Welcome, Professor Jackson. We're honored that you are present here today, at least online present. You were also a member of the assessment committee, and I would like to give you the floor to ask your questions to the candidate.
Thank you. Let's see, a few general comments to begin. First of all, congratulations to the candidate for all the work that you've done. This is a very, it's an important topic, and it's also very complex. One of the real strengths of the research is that you did attempt to assess various biases using a single paradigm. Now, it's quite true that you want to use ecologically valid methods, but I think it's important to point out that a lot of the inconsistencies in the literature are due to high levels of error when you use different methodological approaches within a single study. Using a single paradigm, hopefully what's happening is you're able to reduce some of the error that's involved. And ideally, we're not that nimble yet with the methodology that we use to assess dynamic biases. So hopefully, this is a step in that direction, okay? In terms of comments, I'm going to go into the weeds a little bit and ask a couple of questions about the methodology that were a concern to me. First of all, regarding the interpretation bias trials in studies 2 and 3, experiments 2 and 3, it seemed like in the more ambiguous condition, you had 4 ellipse stimuli, and for the pain condition, you had 2 stimuli, and for the no pain condition, you had 2 stimuli. Experiment 3, there was also a bias in that you were using 3 ambiguous stimuli rather than 2 for the other conditions. What are there potential problems with using an unbalanced set of stimuli between the conditions? An imbalance, it's not really clear from reading your thesis, but it seems like there was an imbalance in the number of trials presenting each of the kinds of stimuli. So basically, I'd like you to comment on that.
Okay, highly esteemed opponent. Thanks for your questions, and also thanks for your positive feedbacks. And maybe you ask the stimuli I used in the pan-aim paradigm for the chapter 3 or for the chapter 4, right?
Right, chapters 3 and 4.
Yes. So you will want to know why for the CS plus category there are two kinds of stimuli, but for the ambiguous cues there are 3 types, and for the CS minus there are also 2. The category of the stimuli is not consistent. It's 2, 3, 2, not consistent, right?
Right, and in the preceding study, it was 4, 2, 2. So basically, you have more stimuli, more trials with the ambiguous stimuli, and you have effects for the ambiguous stimuli versus the other stimuli.
Yes. Okay. To be honest, for the pilot study, for the chapter for the pi-aim paradigm, we use the full stimuli, full kind of stimuli for CS plus cues, and also full stimuli, full kinds of cues for the CS ambiguous, and also full types of the cues for the CS minus. But the results is not good because there are a lot of circles, a lot of different shape of the circles. So the participants in the acquisition phase, if the circle is too much, they didn't learn the effects very well. They didn't learn which kinds of cue will related to the shock and which will not. That's why after the pilot study, we decreased the full type of the cue to 2 types of cue for the CS plus and for the CS minus. And in this way, the participants learn better. And for the ambiguous cues, we don't want to participants guess which cue is ambiguous. That's why we use the full type of the cues. So that's why maybe the trials is not consistent for each category.
Okay, is that a potential confound? Are there differences in reliability when you give twice as many trials in one condition as you do in 2 other conditions? Or, I mean, if you have a self-report measure, if you have twice as many items on that measure as another measure, does it affect reliability?
So sorry, I couldn't. Could you rephrase? Sorry, I couldn't get your this
Sure.
question.
You basically you had 4 kinds of ambiguous stimuli, right? And 2 types of pain and 2 no pain. So the number of trials, basically you had twice as many trials where ambiguous stimuli were used compared to pain and no pain. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Wouldn't that have an effect? Is that a potential confound?
Because we want to counterbalance the participants, because maybe some participants say the longest ellipse and the CS plus, and for their half part of the participants, and they will say the round ellipse and the pain related cues. So in this way, we can counterbalance the participants.
You counterbalance them on pain and no pain, right? But you didn't counterbalance them on the ambiguous ones.
No, we don't need to do that, because in the acquisition phase, just the 2 type of the cues will show. Just in the test phase, and the ambiguous cue will show to the participants. So for all participants, they will say all ambiguous cues.
Okay. Okay. In general, if you're if there's more trials of one type in an experiment, you get a higher reliability in general, up to a certain point. Obviously, if it's an excessive number of trials, that can affect reliability. But just having double the number of trials of ambiguous stimuli, it's a bit of a concern, given that your main effects in these studies have been with ambiguous stimuli. I think it would have been tighter to equate the conditions for the number of stimuli used. And that way, any effects that you get could be attributed to, you could rule out that as a confound, okay?
Mr. Jackson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but given our time constraints, I think we should finalize your discussion here and go to the next opponent.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, thank you very much. The next opponent is Professor Nederkorn. She is a professor of clinical psychology of eating at Maastricht University. You were again also a member of the assessment committee of the thesis, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, I've read your thesis with great interest and pleasure. You reviewed the literature and you used innovative and clever experimental designs to study the role of cognitive biases in pain. I want to congratulate you and your supervisors, therefore, with this great thesis. But I also have a question. Last Wednesday, it was on the news that in the Netherlands, 3.5 million people have chronic pain, while treatment was still not very effective. In the news item, it was stated that medication with opioids was problematic, but although the role of fear was recognized, the solution they offered was treatment with different medication. I was reading it and I thought, why was psychological treatment not considered? And I thought that your thesis, that it disproves how important your research is. But then I also wondered what you would recognize for treatment. And I read in your thesis that you suggest also today in your presentation that cognitive bias modification might be a good alternative. However, your results are a bit mixed. And you also have some interactions between the biases which was negative. And then I wonder, because you state it might be good to train multiple biases simultaneously, and I wondered how you would do that. Would you then train one bias in one direction and an interpretation bias in the other direction, for instance? Or how would you do that if the results are not that clear?
Yes, okay. Highly esteemed opponent, thanks for your positive feedback and thanks for your questions. So if you want to ask why, for example, in the chapter 4, I found the interpretation bias and the attentional bias have the negative relationship. And I think maybe it's related to the methodology, because for the Q presentation time and in chapter 4, and I used 500 milliseconds. I think maybe this Q presentation time is quite long, and initially participants pay their attention on the pain cues, but after a period, and they shift their attention to the attentional to the pain cues. So that's why I think this caused to the negative relationship with those two biases.
Yes, I understand that. But if you then train it, would you then train attention away or towards pain?
I think I read some papers about the attentional bias modification. I think they just treat them away from the pain attention. For example, if there are two kinds of cues appeared, the happy or painful, and maybe we can treat the participants to look at the happy face more rather than the pain face. I think it's better to treat their cognitive attentional bias.
But that depends then on the timing, right? Because if you have the other timing, you might do it the opposite way.
No, I think it's not related to the modification. I found the positive way just because I think it's just because the how to say this, the vigilance avoidance model. But for the modification, I think it's not the same case.
Why not? Because if people have this approach avoidance, so vigilance avoidance, then if you train it, you also have to consider that they have the same two phases. So you have to be careful what you train then.
Yes, of course. For the real modification study, I think we need to consider it. The timing is important. But now, this moment, I don't know which time presentation is better for the modification. But I agree, the timing is very important. We need to consider that.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. But I also thought, you say, hey, there are in the literature and also in your finding a lot of differences. It might depend on the sample, on the method. Would it be wise to train everyone with the same, all the biases? Or would you then maybe say it should be individualized, that some persons get this bias because for them it's important and for others another bias? Or do you think everyone needs to be trained all cognitive biases?
I think maybe different people need to treat different way because for some chronic pain patients, they have high anxiety, but some will have low anxiety. So if you treat the high anxiety people and the low anxiety people, we need to consider the different treatment. And also because chronic pain always weighs some other illness such as anxiety and depression. So I think we need to consider it in the individual level.
Yes, thank you very much. I think as well. But do you at this point think that your method is good enough now to make a diagnosis for one individual to say, for you, we need this bias and for you not? Or do you think some work is to be done? Because the measures you have now is on a group level, right? Not on an individual-based level.
Yeah. I think maybe before we ask the participants to conduct my paradigm, they can fill out the questionnaire, and according to the questionnaire, we can separate for example, the anxiety or depression level. So I think before the paradigm, we can have a small check for the participants, and we can treat the participants separately.
Based on the questionnaire then?
Yeah, questionnaire. At this moment, just a questionnaire come up in my mind.
Yeah.
So maybe in the actual study, we can refine my thoughts.
That's fine. Okay, thank you very much for your answer, and I give the word back to the proactor.
Thank you. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. van Laarhoven, Associate Professor in Psychophysiological Processes in Itch and Pain at Leiden University. And Dr. van Laarhoven was also a member of the Assessment Committee. So welcome, and the floor is yours, Dr. van Laarhoven.
Thank you, dear Pro-Rector. Esteemed candidates, also my compliments to you and your team of supervisors for this nice PhD dissertation, which describes an interesting journey in the development of an innovative and elegant all-in-one task for cognitive bias towards pain, and that is the pain aim task. And in this task, you have trials for attention, interpretation, and memory, as we already discussed. And particularly the interpretation part, I would like to discuss with you. If I'm not mistaken, the main outcome for the interpretation part is the extent to which you expect the presence of pain. And to me, this rather looks like an expectancy bias instead of an interpretation bias. So maybe you could help me here and explain what makes this an interpretation bias in your view.
Yes, esteemed opponent, thanks for your kind words and the questions. And so maybe you ask me to explain how the interpretation bias works in my study?
Yes, sure. And how that relates to expectancy bias.
So in the novel pain paradigm, as you can see, there are ambiguous trials, there are pain-related trials and no pain-related trials. And in the acquisition phase, participants can learn which cue related to the pain and which will not. And so in the for the ambiguous quiz in the acquisition phase, they didn't say them, but only in the test phase they will say them. So I can text how they interpret this. They never say cues, these ambiguous cues, as painful or not painful. So I just ask a question: what extent pain expectancy you think to this kind of ellipse? So I use this one sentence question to let them to reflect their expectancy for these trials, for these cues.
Okay, so the expectancies were related to these new ambiguous cues, right? These were newly shown. But then it's not the pain itself, right? That is being perceived. And isn't the pain the main thing you are interested in? How they perceive or what their interpretation is of the pain itself instead of a circle?
Yes, because for the definition of the interpretation bias, it means you can interpret the ambiguous information as more painful. So in my study, even though these ambiguous cues never related to the pain, but the patients or participants will interpret these non-pain cues and pain-related. So I use this theory to test the interpretation bias.
Yeah, that's interesting because in Leiden, as you may know, we do a lot of research on expectancies, and then also we learn individuals' associations between cues and outcomes, for instance, pain, but also itch. And then we test them for generalization cues. So the other stimuli we give, and we ask them about their pain expectancies. And yeah, we do not call it interpretation bias there because it's not the pain itself that is being otherwise perceived. But maybe it's just a matter of how we call it. I do have another question, if there is time left. My question would be, because you had a threat manipulation in chapter 5, if I'm correct. It was study 3 of your presentation at the start of this defense. And the threat manipulation did not work as you intended. And one of the issues there you said was maybe the environment in the lab is too safe. Well, obviously that's a very good thing. That's what we want to. But how could we move forward and investigate the role of threat properly in a controlled experimental design next time? If well, the lab will always be a safe place, right? Do you have ideas for this?
Sorry, you asked for the threat study, the surrounding environment.
I'm asking about proper threat manipulation in an experiment. How can we do a good threat manipulation in the lab?
How can we do the threat manipulation in the lab, right?
Yeah, and so it's successful.
Yes, I read the papers, the literature for the previous one, and just as I explained, I noticed they always the threats related to the cold water task. So they will say in the low group, and they will say the cold water will not hurt you, and you are totally safe. But for the high threat group, they will say the cold water is so painful, and it will hurt your head. So in this way, and the experimenter to introduce the threat to the participants. But I thought maybe this threat is not directly related to our cognitive bias task. Maybe this will introduce some confounding. That's why in my study, because in the cognitive bias, I used the pain shock, right? So when I introduced the threats, I told the participants a fake story, and it's also related to the pain shock. I say your skin resistance may be changeable. Your skin resistance, if stable, is in the low group. So your pain feeling will totally same as the calibration phase. But in the high threat group and eyesight, because of your skin resistance lower, and in the actual test, your your pain feeling must be higher compared to the calibration phase. So in this way, I think the threat manipulation is directly related to the cognitive bias. So I think it's better than the cold water task raised the threat.
Okay, yeah, I think it's a very good idea, and yeah, I hope it will be successful the next time. And I would like to give the word back to the prorector. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. van Laarhoven. The opposition will be continued by Professor Peters. Professor Peters is a professor for experimental health psychology here at Maastricht University, and she was not a member of the assessment committee. But the floor is yours, Professor Peters.
Elite.
Yeah.
Dear candidate, I gladly join in the congratulations and praise which have already been made to you. I really read it, even though I was not in the committee, I read it with great pleasure, and also want to extend my congratulations to your team. I have several questions, but I will start, maybe it's still time for others, but I will start with following up on this threat manipulation, which Dr. van Laarhoven also alluded to. And because I actually think you had a kind of neat manipulation. You had this cover-up story, and you tried at least to make it threatful. And I truly understand that it's very difficult in a safe context and with healthy participants to find something like that, but at least it was a good try. But then in the end you conclude, well, it doesn't work, it didn't work. But how sure are you that your manipulation did not work? Because if I understand you correctly, you only measured the fear after this whole session of giving those electrical stimuli, and maybe even if they had this feeling, oh, well, this might be threatening in the beginning, it might be disconfirmed by having these, all the stimuli which were not very painful, or at least not more painful than they would expect. So are you sure that not even in the beginning it might have worked? And could you test it?
Yes. Highly esteemed opponent, thanks for your questions and positive feedback. And to be honest, I agree with you. And also, I write down in my general thesis, general discussion part, I think the timing to test the threat manipulation is very, very important, because I test the participant the threat manipulation end of the pain-aim paradigm. So I think maybe these results influenced by the pain-aim. So I think if in the future, maybe we can test the threat manipulation several times. For example, in the beginning, in the middle, and also in the end, we can compare their threat changed. But also, I think if we test this several times, we need to make sure the participant didn't realize you are tested.
Yeah.
So it's also important.
Yeah, that's another risk. I indeed read that, and I agree that that is a risk if you have it done multiple times. But I was thinking a little bit, because you cannot change it anymore, of course, in your experiment 5, so that would be for future experiments. But in your, well, it was experiment 3, I think, but in the last experiment, chapter 5, what you could do, and what I was actually surprised that you did not do, if you test your attentional bias and interpretation bias effects, you have this cue validity and cue stimulus interaction, but you never tested for a group effect. At least it's not described in your statistical analysis that you add this group effect. And in the end, you didn't do it because it didn't work. But have you not even looked at it, maybe secretly, and not report it? Or do you know anything if there was a group effect on this, on the attentional biases and the interpretation biases?
So sorry, you asked the group effects for the...
Yes, because you had two groups, a no-threat and a threat group.
Ah.
So it would make sense to have another factor in your repeated measures ANOVA. You know, now you only have a Q validity and a stimulus, Q stimulus, I don't know exactly what you call it, but those two factors. But I would have expected that at least designing the study, you would also have a factor for the group, because that was your manipulation, but you never tested the group effect.
No, I didn't. Let me think about. For the thread manipulation, I have a little bit forgot. I didn't check the group effects, but I think I did it. But I also found the effects.
Okay, so you did not describe it, and you did not say that you were going to do it, but in fact you might have looked at it after all.
Yes.
Is that the case?
Yeah, I think I checked. I checked the single group, and I also checked the whole group level, but there is no difference about the threads. That's why I didn't write down in my thesis.
Yeah, okay, there was no difference in threat, but my question was there a difference in either attentional bias or interpretation bias between the group? Because that was actually your hypothesis too, and I was very surprised that you did not test for any group effect, nor in the moderation, whether there was a difference between the threat and the no-threat group.
Yes, because use the thread manipulation check question, we didn't find the relationship between the fear and the pain expectancy in the two groups. That's why I said maybe the thread manipulation field. That's why we used another index to replace the thread to test the moderator.
Yep. Yeah, I totally understand, but I still had to come back to my first question. How sure are you that it indeed failed? And it would maybe nice, because it could be still that they had this more fear in the beginning of when they got the electrical stimuli, but at the end, it fainted away. They didn't have it anymore. So maybe even for the first stimuli, you could maybe even look at the first part and do an analysis and post hoc analysis on that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Maybe later after the PhD defense, I can pick up my data and to analyze, use the thread level to look at the data.
Okay, it's an idea. Yeah, well, there's a little time, so I had also a question on the timing of your stimuli, because it was also in response to Professor Nederkoorn. You said in the first experiment with the pain aim, you used 500 milliseconds, and then in the second one, you used 300 milliseconds,
300.
because to avoid this avoidance. And if you would do it again, what would you do? Would you still go for the 300? Because I did also see that you did find an attentional bias in the first experiment with the 500, but not when you use the 300. So what would be your optimal timing of delivering those stimuli?
I think maybe if next time I will use 200 milliseconds, because for the previous study I noticed they used 200 milliseconds for the timing. But in my study we consider maybe my stimuli is more complex than their study. That's why we used the first study 500 milliseconds, and the second one I used 300 milliseconds. But use those milliseconds, we didn't find the effects. I think maybe the participants is so clever, and maybe they learn the effects very well. So maybe I can decrease the timing to 200 milliseconds. It's also
right.
Okay. But also maybe I can incorporate with the eye tracking. So I think it's a more directly way to say the participants.
That was my next question. If you are going to reduce it, can you still use the eye tracking, or should you then have a longer time?
Yes, if I still have a chance, I will do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to answer this last question very briefly, go ahead. But if you prefer not to do it, that's fine also.
No, I think it's enough.
It's enough, okay. Well, thank you. The beadle has come in. So, Ting Xu, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. All your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Get the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you grow. South side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Can't fly by now, don't waste all your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile.
Ting Xu. The degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense, and in view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Van Kleef is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to take now the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with...
Yeah.
Do you promise to work in accordance with principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Ting Xu, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now pronounce you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
Dear Ting, I'm happy to give this laudatio in name of Linda and myself. I'm actually very pleased that we stand here in the aula after 4 years of hard work. This is a time for celebration and reflection. Celebrating we will do in a minute, I hope so. But now it's time for reflection. And my memory actually goes back to an email I sent to Todd Jackson, who was also so nice to be in your PhD jury today, asking him whether he could recommend a student for a CSC grant. And in the first email I received back from Todd, he mentioned you. And in the preparation of this laudation, I went back to his first emails and I found his support letter. And particularly he wrote following, and I quote, so don't take me on this. So it's a quotation, some snippets of his letter. Particularly he said, Ms. Xu was among the most productive research members in collecting data during the year she was involved in the project. I have found Ms. Xu to show high levels of interest, initiative, and independence in the conduct of the thesis research. Ms. Xu has good conceptual understanding of analysis she performed. Her background in computer science and experience with a wide range of analytic procedures are clearly strengths of Ms. Xu. While English is Ms. Xu's second language, her comprehension of English is good, and her oral and written English expression are typically clear and easy to understand. And he ended his letter, I think her background, current competencies and capacity to learn will ensure that Ms. Xu successfully completes research requirements associated with the PhD program in Maastricht University. I must say, when I saw all these things, this raised my expectations. And it set also the bar very high for you to arrive at Maastricht University. Not long after this, we received actually very positive news from the CSC that you could actually start your project at Maastricht University. Yet, that was easier said than done, because at that time also COVID was widely present. And in the first year, well, we actually met mainly online. There were not many on-site meetings, so everything was online. And well, the online meetings, I remember actually also the first meeting quite lively. The first meeting we discussed about what we would do during this meeting. During the PhD, we discussed about the setup of the PhD. Linda and I were both on the one side, you were on the other side. Well, actually, I mainly thought, okay, there's an error in this motivation letter or in this recommendation letter. Well, we both spoke English, at least we thought so. Yet, I did not understand you, and you did not understand me. Luckily, Linda was there to help, because we all both had I have a Dutch accent, you have a very Chinese accent, and if I see the presentation today, I think everyone agrees you did a great job. So you really improved a huge amount in that. So one thing of the recommendation letter was not true, at least. At the same time, during this COVID, I also learned that you were a very enthusiastic person, always positive, and as now, again, a smile on the face. Even during these difficult COVID times. And that was actually quite necessary, because in the first year, we couldn't do a lot, and many people would actually despair, would start to think like, I will not make it. Not you. You were confident, I will make it. And you also start working hard on developing stimuli, on developing a lot of different things for your study. Then, of course, this first year passed without any data collection. So 1 year of the 4 was passed. And Linda and I were already like, oh, this is not so good. Not you. You thought, I will do it. And you also met up the expectations we had based upon this recommendation letter, because the first study, the data you collected in is record time. I think we were both surprised. I think 1 month, 2 months, data were collected, 90 participants, very well done. So you did a really great job on that, showing that you were highly productive in collecting data. Results were not completely as anticipated and also as discussed today, but you already started working again on the next study, showing you our you took initiative, started with a review, and together with your partner in crime, Joey, you started reading all the literature on combined cognitive biases. You looked at all different studies where there was a relationship between attention, interpretation, and memory bias. There was a lot of discussion, but in the end, if I see the product of this review, it shows that, again, as the bar was set high, you did a very good job, you were very diligent and responsible and completed the review very carefully. Time again continued, and you started with an eye tracking study, a novel methodology. Again, you learned quite quickly this methodology, and you were not on your own. Also, you had Eileen on your side, and it also showed actually that you were not only working on your own on your studies, but you're also able to teach students how to use this methodology. And I know that from Eileen, she was very happy she could work with you, and now she can actually use this methodology on her own as well. Over the past years, of course, you were not only working. I have also learned that you like traveling a lot. You like to travel through Europe. You went to Egypt. You went to a lot of other countries. And sometimes we also knew where you went because you brought some gifts for us. I still have this small statue from Egypt, so I'll nicely set aside. You also had your boyfriend traveling with you. And you were always very enthusiastic when you spoke over him. He is also the person who made this cover, so thanks to him. Very well done. In sum, I can say, and to conclude this, I can say the letter which was sent by Todd Jackson, it contained a lot of truth, and you have completed the PhD in a very good way. I hereby wish you a future where you can flourish also in academia and around. So, congratulations, Dr. Xu, on behalf of Linda and myself. And now I think it's time for celebration.
Thank you.
Dear Dr. Xu, also on behalf of Maastricht University, it's an honor for me to congratulate you with the degree that you have just acquired. Also, my congratulations to your supervisors, and of course, congratulations to your family and friends. Nice that you've been here, nice that you came. So thank you very much. We're going to close this ceremony, but we'll have 2 photo moments. We can make a photograph here in front of the screen, and you will have also the opportunity to get the microphone and say something to Todd Jackson and Dr. van Leyenhoven if you want. Afterwards, we'll go outside. There is the big hall, the staircase, where we can make a photograph. And after that, we're going to meet and congratulate you and have drinks in the restaurant where we have a reception. So thank you very much. And as said, I will close this ceremony now.
Okay, I want to thank for the online teachers. Thank you.
Okay. If you stand in front of the screen, yeah. Take a photograph.